3rd, I'd like to call the meeting to order. Our first item is a Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Karen, could you read our mission statement?
The mission of the Marshall Public School District is to educate, support, and prepare all learners for success.
Thank you.
What was I supposed to know by heart?
It's up there in the board.
I know.
Tricia, it isn't switching to the next thing. It's like it's stuck. There it goes. It's just really slow.
You're quicker than Jeff.
It's not moving. Next item is approval of the agenda. I'll make a motion. I'll need a second.
Second.
More technical difficulties. Okay, are there any additions or corrections to the agenda? If not, I'll call for the vote. It's stuck again. Okay, I'll just take a roll call vote. Just say aye or nay.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. The agenda is approved. I can, and the gate's freezing up. Public forum. Is there anybody in the public that would like to address the board? Okay, we'll move on. Oh. Yep. At this time, I'd like to welcome Aaron Seymour to our board and thank him for his willingness to serve. And if you could stand, Aaron, we're going to do the oath of office. I'm going to read about 3 or 4 paragraphs and then have you repeat after me at the end. It is an honor that you were elected, appointed to guide the education of our community's children. As you recite the oath of office, you assume a tremendous responsibility as the director of our school district, with the duties empowered by the Minnesota legislature. This power puts you and the other members of our school board in the position of being both morally and legally responsible for equitable, quality education of every student in the district. In carrying out this responsibility, you will be asked to fulfill the roles of vision, structure, accountability, and advocacy. In providing vision, the board, with extensive participation of the community, envisions the community's educational future and then formulates the goals, defines the outcomes, and sets the course for public schools. To achieve the vision, the board establishes a structure and creates an environment designed to ensure all students the opportunity to attain their maximum potential through a sound organizational framework. Because as a board, we must be accountable to the community. We must ensure a continuous assessment of student achievement and all conditions affecting the education of our children. As board members, we serve as education's key advocate on behalf of students and our community schools to advance the vision for our schools. Furthermore, we must strive to work together and with the superintendent and staff to lead the district toward fulfilling the vision we have created, fostering excellence for every student in the areas of academic skills and knowledge, citizenship, and personal development. Having signed the acceptance of office and oath of office, will you please publicly affirm your commitment by repeating the oath of office after me? I swear that I will support the Constitution of the United States and of this state.
I swear that I will support the Constitution of the United States and of this state.
And I will discharge faithfully the duties of the office of school board member.
And that I will discharge faithfully the duties of the office of school board member
of Independent School Number 413 to the best of my judgment and ability.
Of Independent School District Number 413 to the best of my judgment and ability.
Congratulations. You're official. Our next item is our presentation by our School Safety Committee. It looks like all of our administrators are here and Officer Van Louis, so if you guys want to come forward.
We wanted to take some time this afternoon to share an update with you guys on some current and proposed procedures we have with our School Safety Committee. We have a committee that meets every other month that has representation from each site. So we talk about school safety and issues that are going on, our crisis plans and that sort of thing, and what we're doing. Did you get any liquor? Okay. So one of the things we have in place in the classroom, last year we purchased a Go Kit. It's a red nylon bag that's in every classroom that has a few just essential things they would need in case of emergency. One of the things you'd see inside every kit in every classroom is one of the flip charts that has an overview for all the crisis procedures, so teachers have that if they were to evacuate for anything. They also keep attendance rosters and emergency, some first aid supplies in there for students as they would need them. Something else that's in there is we have an instant command structure set up. So in case of the emergency, we have, saying as a building principal, maybe I'm usually in charge of something when I'm there, but what happens if I'm not there when there's a crisis? So for each site, we've laid out 3 people deep for every different area, everything that has to happen, so we know who's in charge next if the typical person isn't there. This is something that gets updated every year and is in those Go Kits as well, and every building has that set up ready to go. The other thing I wanted to show you this evening is we have an emergency response team at each site. So in the summers, we always train staff on CPR and emergency first aid procedures. So in each site, we have an emergency response team set up. Typically, it's not classroom teachers. It's going to be paras or some staff that aren't directly tied to a classroom of kids in case of an emergency. So if we had a medical emergency, we would page emergency response team or ERT team report. They come down the office. There's a set of cards that looks just like this in every building. It's in a little recipe box. They come down and we have a card, so we know that someone gets the first aid kit and the AED, and that's the first card to go. So that person grabs that card and the first aid kit, and they go to wherever we have to send them to. and then so on for all the other steps, things that have to happen. That way, if someone doesn't come down, we're missing somebody, we know what hasn't been taken care of. So we know that all the steps are taken care of in case of a medical emergency. So that's been a process we've had in place, and we drill each of these each year. So one of our drills always involves those different steps, for example, the emergency response team. Then the piece we want to spend more time on this evening and going through the school year is we've been having some conversations about our current lockdown procedures and some updated procedures for that. So this summer we sent a team with representation from each of the buildings to a Alice training looking at some updates on lockdown procedures, and that's what the rest of the team is here to talk about.
One of the biggest things that you're going to notice with the Alice training is that it focuses a lot on the traditional lockdown that we had in the past, where we gather all our students into classrooms, huddle them in a corner, and try and secure and lock and keep them into the classrooms. And we find that they're kind of sitting ducks in situations that have happened, and so the Alice model is going to be more decision-based on what's happening in that moment, give the people the power, the students the power to take different action to try and counter and have a higher survivability and probability of success, that we come out winners in a situation like that. And we hope that as the board, we will get your support tonight to go ahead and implement that as soon as possible. And we'll be explaining kind of each of the steps in the Alice process as we go.
Before we get into the rest of the presentation or the meat of the Alice program, we just want to take a moment to make sure that everybody understands that we were in this training. This was it was during the first week in June, I believe. This team went to Laverne for the training, and there were probably 50-ish, right? Am I on the right track? Okay. There were approximately 50 different people there in training, and probably a third of those being trained were school personnel, administrators and admin assistants and such. The rest were police officers and highway patrolmen. And there was a definite difference in how we looked at what would happen in a crisis. And as the training began and as they went throughout the training, it became glaringly obvious to us that this was extremely harsh verbiage that was used. The training, the videos, everything that occurred was a little bit out of our box, our comfort zone. And we all know that no matter what, if we're in a crisis, it's going to be emergency-like. It's a crisis. However, the verbiage that's used in some of the information, the videos that are shown, and what we would have to move forward with in ensuring that our staff is trained properly, we need for everybody to understand that we are empathetic and compassionate about what is said and how the training is conducted. But it does become very blatant about the massacres that can happen in a school, and we're talking about our young people and our peers. And so we also want to make it very clear that it's alarming to hear some of the things that have to be said in order to prepare best for some of this training. So some of that is also consideration with how you go about training, first of all, your staff, but then the students from each area, as well as informing parents as to how and what kind of verbiage we'll use with their children at each different age level. And then the community and getting the community's support when we're talking about some of these things. So.
All right, so ALICE is an acronym, and I'm not just talking about the model itself. And ALICE is a research-based model that allows individuals to be proactive in their thinking and to make the best decision possible in a violent situation. The mission of ALICE is up on the screen there, and it's basic: to save more lives. But the bottom line, ALICE is empowering our staff to make the best decision in a moment, in a violent moment that is happening. And so as Mary Kay and Sarah explained a little bit, we came about ALICE because our traditional school safety committee had been talking about, is the traditional lockdown the right thing to do? Like we said, where we huddle everybody in a corner, we shut the lights off, we pull the shades. Is that really the best model to follow at this point? After some further discussion, and we did some research, we found that area schools were either considering switching to ALICE, or similar model, or they already had. And so we consulted with law enforcement, our local law enforcement, just to get their input and for them to share their thoughts and ideas with us. And they had actually encouraged us to proceed with the training. And so like Mary Kay said, in June, we headed to Laverne. It was high school principal Brian Jones, middle school principal Mary Kay Thomas, elementary principal Darcy Love, school resource officer Sarah Van Looy, and myself for a 2-day training. And I guess I would echo what Mary Kay had to say. This was probably one of the most intense things that I had ever been through. It was very, the training itself was based on hearing a lot of video clips and watching videos themselves. We heard some clips from Columbine, and we heard a lot of stories, and it was very emotional, and it was intense. And so, and it was very, as Mary Kay shared, it was very apparent that educators took a different approach than the law enforcement. You know, law enforcement was there to take the bad guy out, and the educators were there to save as many lives as we possibly could in this situation. But basically, the bottom line of the drills and the training were to prepare us for a violent intruder situation. And so Alice was really developed by a husband and wife. The husband was a former police officer, and she was a former school administrator. And this all came about after Columbine. And what they share with us is Alice is really a proactive approach. It's thinking ahead, looking around the room to determine what you can use in your space to save yourself. Or if you can't use anything, what's an alternative exit or area that you can remove yourself from the situation. It provides additional options beyond the traditional lockdown. And so we talked about huddling in the corner. That's really not the best option anymore, is what they're telling us. You should spread out in a room. You should barricade yourself. You should find alternative exits. And these are all things that Brian is going to talk to you about in a moment. Assume that not every event is the same. There's no single response that fits all violent situations. However, if you make sure that an individual knows their options, the response time is what is going to save their lives. And so when they can respond in a timely manner, that is what's going to save lives. And it's really motor memory. Drilling is very important because you do what you drill, and you drill what you do. And so having people not be able to stop and think, what should I do, is really important in this. And really, Alice training is a life skill that can be used in a whole variety of situations. And when we think about violent intruders, we often think that this happens in a school. But the reality of a violent intruder is that it really does happen anywhere. And this slide right here shows you that it can happen in business, places of worship, university, government, hospital. What's on the screen there really shows you some of our most recent shootings across the nation. And many of which you can see took place in business or places of worship. And so one of the things we also talked about in our training was the shooting in Las Vegas. Many of the people that had went through the Alice training knew to evacuate the scene, and they saved themselves. Even though everybody was telling them to get down, they felt like they were empowered to evacuate and leave the scene, and therefore saving themselves and their loved ones. So now I'll turn it over to Darcy, and she'll share a little bit more about lockdown.
So when we went to this training, I initially thinking, you know, as the K-2 principal, what's best for our youngest, littlest learners? Because my preconceived idea of this was fighting back, and it's not. It's very different than that. And so one question I have always had in my mind in regards to our process and procedures is, if we have an incident take place in the cafeteria, we have a whole nother side of the building. Why do we just sit there and wait? I've never quite understood that. I get it, but I've always wondered what would happen if we got out, if we could, if we went out the doors, if we broke the windows. Every classroom has a window that they could easily get out. And so that has always been kind of in my mind as well. And so this training really affirmed that thinking and changed my thinking in that regard. And I think there was one case study in particular that I'll share with you that really reinforces that how we've traditionally done it, the hiding and trying to wait for law enforcement to get there probably isn't the best model. We learned a lot about how long it actually takes from the time a call is made till a law enforcement person actually is on scene. The most recent, or not most recent, but one of the recent incidents with Sandy Hook, I believe that was the whole incident itself was less than 5 minutes, and it takes law enforcement at least 10 to, by the time they get the call, by the time they get there, they have to assess the situation, and then by the time they go in, we can't wait for them. We can't wait for them to come and help with the situation or rescue us in that regard. And so these next slides kind of give an example of the difference between classrooms that use the passive model of hide and take cover and wait versus those that are more proactive and use a more like a barricade or some other way of keeping out the intruder. And this was the other piece too that I thought about for us is our classrooms, all the doors locked, or they all lock. We keep them locked, so you just have to pull the little door block and the door locks, but there is a window. And so what we found out is that those door locks are not completely 100% secure. A lot of times we can break those just by pulling on them hard. They can shoot out the windows. There's all kinds of things for them to get in. So just because your door is locked doesn't mean that you're safe. And so this was actually the Virginia Tech shooting that took place. And so just to kind of break it down, these are the rooms. So 206 is at the top. Room 204 is the one in green. Room 211 is the one in red. Room 207 is the one in red. And then 205 across the bottom there. And so in room 201, that's where the gunman originally went into the building. He shoots the instructor, and the students are all hiding and trying to get out of the way, and they're under desks and they're in corners. He continues to shoot anyone that is in that room. He leaves that room. He then moves into room 207. In room 207, he kills the instructor and he starts to shoot all of the students who have also went under the desks. They try to hide from him, but obviously you can't hide in a classroom. The next room that he goes into is room 205. This room hears what is happening in the other rooms, and they take a table and they tip it up on the side, and they use their bodies and that table to barricade the room. The shooter tries to get into room 205, pushes the door, won't move, so he takes the gun and he shoots 3 times. Still can't get in. No one was injured. He never returns to that room. He then goes to room 211. In room 211, they did actually have a table there, but they pushed the table in front of the room, and then they went under desks, went into the corners of the rooms to try to hide. The gunman pushes the table out of the way and walks around the room just shooting. He then goes back into room 207. The students in this room, after again he had been in there the first time, they start barricading the room with their hands and feet and trying to just hold him out. The doors open inward, so he's not able to get back in. So there were no further casualties other than the ones when he was in there the first time. The 6th time he goes back into room 211. He shoots anyone laying on the ground at this point. Then he goes to room 204, and this one was really interesting also. The professor, the teacher in the room, was holding the door with his body so that the shooter couldn't get in, and he tells people, jump, get out, get out, get out. And so 14 students jump out the 2nd-story window. They all survived. Nothing happened to them. The shooter gets into the room, shoots the instructor, and anyone else that's left in that room. The next room that he goes into is back into, so where am I at? I'm in 204, so that's where they jump out. So then he goes back into that first room that he entered into 204, or into, 206. Again, this is a room where they were not able to keep him out, and he just continues to shoot. Then he goes back into 211, and that's where he ends up killing himself. And so if you look at the bars at the bottom of each of those rooms, those are fatalities and injuries. So the green are survivors. The dark red are injuries, and then the bright red are deaths from those rooms specifically. So you can see the rooms that use proactive approaches, whether that be jumping out the window, barricading. Their survival rate was much higher than in any of those other classrooms.
It's hard to listen to.
That is. It was hard to hear the first time and
You know it really happened. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just not a made-up
Yeah.
scenario.
Yep, exactly.
So the ALICE system, ALICE is simply an acronym. It's not a step-by-step process because you're going to need to make those real-time decisions, and we need everyone to make those real-time decisions. And so the reason they're in this order is simply that fit into the acronym, but it's not, again, not a step-by-step process. So A, the alert, that's simply the initial awareness, and many times this comes from sensory. This might be hearing in your classroom, running in the halls, screaming, yelling. It might be gunfire. It doesn't necessarily mean it's a notification from the public address system like the speaker might lead you to think. Maybe it is, and so it's important to know in our buildings, do we have any areas that don't have adequate coverage? It's not that it necessarily means that an announcement is going to always come from the office, because in many cases that person somehow might not be coming from the main entrance. It might be a person who is already within the building. And so it's just going to be the alert. It really is going to come from your sensory input, and this is for everyone. This isn't just for the folks in the office or the teachers in the classroom. This would be for our students as well. The lockdown, we continue to use the lockdown. It's in our current model, but this really is an enhanced lockdown or a lockdown plus. And so you're not getting rid of what we've done, but we're trying to make it better. And then Darcy mentioned some of the things at Virginia Tech that those students did. It's not having everyone go into the corner. It's having your class or the occupants spread out, so there's multiple things for the gunman to consider. It's a proactive strategy, not just sitting and waiting. The threat already knows where everyone is located, but what you're trying to do in a lockdown plus, you're trying to buy time, more minutes for law enforcement to get there. And so the more difficult you can make it be for someone to enter into the room, the better it's going to be. So fortifying that location, moving anything that's heavy in front of that door, covering it up with your windows. We just don't want easy targets. And therefore you make that threat go room to room, again, using more time until help can get there. The aggressor may have to put down their weapon to try to push that door open. That's a great opportunity for people in those other locations then to evacuate and leave. And so that's really, we're keeping that lockdown, but we're trying to make it better, so a lockdown plus. I is to inform, and this really is everyone getting any information they can out to everyone else. And so this is real-time information to the occupants of the building, and this is information that's given during the event. Allows everyone to stay abreast of the incident and help have real-time information for their own survival decision process to be able to continue. And so we've talked about, what does that mean? Well, that means maybe having a hot button on all of our phones where anyone can make a page. So it doesn't have to go from one end of the building to the office, so that the office can make an announcement as to what's going on. And so that's passing on that information, the what, when, where, who, how, what does the person look like, what are they wearing. This will also help law enforcement know who they are looking for and where they are located at. This could hopefully, if done well, could confuse or frustrate the aggressor to let everyone know who they are, what they're looking for. It may also change people's responses from that of a passive response to one that's more proactive. And certainly it's going to help the other people in your building make that decision whether it's okay to evacuate based on knowing the location or whether they should lock down like we saw in the previous slide. And then counter. A lot of people, I guess initially we thought counter meant fighting, and counter really is not fighting. Counter is taking control, trying to take control of a situation that's chaotic and in some ways uncontrollable. Most agencies, we counter a lot in our business, and what that looks like with a student, that might be using CPI as a de-escalation technique, trying to talk a person and help them calm down and settle down. So they already have these tactics, and so they're not considered fighting. So counter, we want to really emphasize that it's not about trying to fight. It's trying to take back control. It's personal choice, and it's a last resort. And what we have up here is something called the OODA loop. And what you're trying to really do is you are trying to, if you're faced with that situation, you're trying to create some confusion for that aggressor. And the more confusion they have, the less they can focus on their task at hand, which is trying to injure, in many cases, trying to injure as many people as possible. And then lastly, evacuate. And certainly evacuate is pretty self-explanatory. We want to give all of our occupants the authority to leave that building. And law enforcement's certainly going to feel like this is probably the best option. And it's not just necessarily coming into school, coming out your door and heading down the hallway like your fire route. You don't know what that route is. And so for some, that may be exiting out windows, doors, back doors, locked doors. And so trying to just help give people the authority to do that, but then also knowing where do you have a rally point, and where do you meet at, and then where do you go in establishing those reunification centers. And so it's going to happen much faster than a fire drill. I would say the average orderly fire drill at Marshall High School to get 850 students out lined up, we're probably looking at 5 to 10 minutes. Best case scenario. And something like this, it's going to be much quicker because it's going to be chaotic, and that's why it's important when if we choose to go this route, why we're going to need to practice and have that rally point where kids can get to, and then once that's safe, that reunification center where we can get our students to and start to maintain or reestablish some control of the situation.
Ryan, you talked about a hot button on the phone. Is that something we put in our proposal?
Yeah, we're looking at it.
Because that would make sense. Get the hot button if it's by my classroom, I'm making the announcement.
It's certainly one of the topics that we're discussing, and it's gone through Mr. Munson and technology and figuring out what can happen. As we mentioned earlier, all of these concepts are difficult to think about, to imagine, to verbalize, and it's certainly difficult to imagine that we have to stand in front of our staff to possibly talk to and train them in different areas in these scenarios. At the same time, we know that we need to plan for the worst and hope for the best, and so it's a reality in today's world. One of several questions is, how do we go about training little people from 4- and 5-year-olds in our buildings to 17, 18, 19-year-olds? And obviously, it's different for every one of those scenarios. But Alice does have some training materials. One small example is the I'm Not Scared, I'm Prepared book that is for our younger population. And talking with Tricia today, we were just talking about how it has kind of the sheep and the wolf scenario, or for our little ones, we train at home as parents and talk them through how they never take a ride from a stranger. You don't take candy from strangers. You don't get that far. And all of those conversations can cause nightmares, can cause lots of anxiety, but it's also something that we have to be proactive on with our parents, with our young people, with middle and high school kids as well. It's alarming. It's difficult to go through. But Alice does have training materials that we'll be able to utilize, at least different options that we'll be able to roll out. And that would be after parent contacts and community contacts to ensure that everybody's on the same page and what's happening in the schools.
Children respond as adults respond. And I know you're putting intense training with our staff because that's a huge piece.
Absolutely. And then our next, let me see, oops, wrong way. Our next steps at this point, with your blessings, we plan to do a similar presentation at Workshop Week next Tuesday out at the high school. And then in the afternoon, we we have 45 minutes with our own building staff that same afternoon to be able to at least roll out some basic concepts, especially the Lockdown Plus. And then it's about moving forward with informing and sharing the information with parents in the community. And then in October, we have an extensive training, 2 to 3 hours with our staff that we would be able to implement some of the more detailed training. And then it's about rolling down to how we're going to train students at each level and then to continue the work and refine the process.
Question, we had lockdown without intruder and lockdown with intruder. Have you decided how often you're going to practice this?
We have not made final decisions on that, Bill.
We are required by statute to do 5 lockdowns per year, whether that be
with or without intruder? Right. Yeah.
Just 5 total.
So that's going to be the basic framework?
Well, the key also, Bill, is that when we do what is now going to be called the ALICE drill, it's not going to be lockdown with intruder anymore. It's going to be ALICE.
Yeah.
Making sure that we inform the parents in the community that we're doing this, because it's going to look very different. As Brian talked about evacuating.
Kids are running out of the building.
800 kids running around outside of your school building. And what does that look like? And so going into an ALICE drill is going to take a little bit more preparation beforehand, probably than the traditional lockdown.
Educate the community.
Yep. And so.
And that can also look like individual classrooms just talking about within their classroom what they would do. Do we break the window? What things do we have within our room that we can put in front of the door? Yeah. So it might not be a full-blown school-wide ALICE drill, but just classrooms practicing that within just their classroom.
Makes sense.
Especially at the elementary level.
So who would do the detailed training? Is it the 5 of you, or does someone from ALICE come in and actually do this?
That was something I forgot to mention. I had that in my piece. Is when we attended that training in Laverne, we were there to become certified instructors. And so the ALICE model cannot be taught in an organization unless you have certified instructors. And so the ALICE training would be done by the 5 of us.
Sarah, because she's law enforcement, could go and train elsewhere, but the 4 of us, really, the only place we could train would be in the schools.
Unless you were with me.
Students we work with.
And we can do the public and parochial schools if we would choose to do that.
And we have a nice little certificate.
So are other schools in the area doing this?
Yes.
That you guys can kind of bounce ideas off each other? Okay.
Minneota, Granite Falls, Laverne, Wyndham, a lot of schools went this summer to get their training.
I thought this is kind of the norm now, isn't it?
And with several states have endorsed specifically ALICE, Minnesota says you need to have some sort of a plan in place. It's just ALICE is one that's recommended but not required at this point. But a lot of states have required ALICE training for their schools.
This process makes a lot of sense.
So we have a list of resources that we encourage you to look at if you want further information on ALICE. There's lots of good stuff there. And when we do our staff trainings this fall and throughout the year, we're going to encourage them also to do that. I think we really need to be beyond the, I hope it doesn't happen here. And I still think we have a lot of people that are in the, I hope it doesn't happen here. We have to be way beyond, I hope it isn't going to happen to, we are prepared if it does happen, or we're constantly preparing for when it does happen. And then our hope can still be there, but we're ready for it. We understand that the thought of a violent intruder situation or some other unfortunate scenario is scary, difficult. It will be hard to talk through with people. Any training that we have already done as a staff usually ends up with more questions. Even our small group, as we work together, we always end up more questions as we work through all of this. The more in depth you look at the school safety stuff, the more we run scenarios by, the what ifs, and those are the things that we need to do. A law enforcement officers in our training do that continuously, and we need to build their muscle memory and our routine of how we're going to, it's just going to be automatic. So we do those things so we are all a little safer in the event that something happens. We're happy to try and answer some of your questions tonight or in the future, and we hope that we get your support to move forward with our ALICE model. Thanks.
As building principals, how do you feel about the process compared to where we were?
Well, it's absolutely, I think all of us feel the same way, that even after the first couple hours of the training we went, this is not rocket science. This is something we have to implement. We need to get this done.
It's something you do in your own home.
Right.
Yeah.
You do it anywhere in natural response, anywhere else, rather than hide under a table and, pile up in a corner.
That's one of the
I
great
like
things.
what you brought up, Darcy, with the a first grade teacher talking to her 20 kids, and this is what we can do in our room to handle it calmly.
Yeah.
And I like the opportunity for especially our middle school and high school kids to be able to run,
Yeah.
to get out of the space. And the hot button, if you're on the far wing in here, you got the hot button, people on this end can take off.
And even for people to be able to pick up the phone and say, there's an intruder in
Well, that's what I'm talking about, the hot button on the phone that
Yeah.
Brian brought up. Yeah.
I talked to my daughter, Lindsay, who teaches kindergarten in Iowa, and she's been through this. They went through it a year or two ago. And she sent me this text. I was asking her all kinds of things about it. And I'll just share this with you. It says, even though the training is really intense, it is totally worth the time. Even my kinders are pros with ALICE. They know how to barricade, counter, and evacuate. It's fabulous.
And the great thing about it is ALICE is not just a model for a school shooting situation. It's a life skill that you can take with you anywhere you are at.
Very good. Thank you, guys. Any other questions?
Good, thank you.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Next item is approval of the consent agenda. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Any discussion on the consent agenda? Not, I'll call for the vote.
Aye.
No, we're going to do it electronically.
Aye.
Oh, we're back on.
Got you fixed.
Okay.
And that is approved. Next item is our financial report. Mr. Karen.
Won't read through each line separate, just a couple of notes to put in if you see some amounts that stick out. Our capital outlay fund includes some of our one-to-one devices, our lighting retrofit project, which is complete now on time, and some of our long-term facility maintenance projects. And then also the debt service fund, that is our interest payment. We have 2 interest payments, one in July, one in January, and then the principal payments in January. So just want to point those out. So also below that, Scott and I had been talking about some different reports that maybe would help show timelines of where the general fund or all the funds have been. So you'll see some different reports we're going to try out with you guys to give you more information, kind of see what past to the present looks like.
I like this report. It's really nice.
I do too. Nice piece.
So we ask that you approve the $2,867.55 worth of bills for July.
Thank you. I'll make a motion. I'll need a second.
Second?
Thank you. Any further discussion? Call for the vote.
Nice report.
That is approved. Did it go through?
Yeah.
Okay. Treasurer's report. Any comments, Dion?
Not a whole lot to report. It's pretty early in the year. Everything matches up with last year, but we still have probably some audit entries that we're going to have to do. And probably a better look come August, September.
Okay. Thank you. Board forum. Anybody have any updates, reports to report? Anyone?
I'll be having a collaborative meeting in the middle of next month with the Land County Collaborative on the Children's Initiative stuff. So I'll let you know then.
Okay.
And I'm going to phase 3 and 4 training on September 14 and 15 at Maple Grove. And you'll be doing 1 and 2 pretty soon, Aaron. You'll like it. It's good stuff.
Yep, it is. All good.
I told Bill 4 was my
Okay, moving on. Our next item is a review of our summer food service. Are you going to go over that?
I will.
Okay.
Yep. Just a brief overview of our summer food program. Successful this year. It's our 6th year of sponsoring it, and just kind of a review that this is a federally funded program. Marshall Public Schools is one that provides 2 locations for kids 18 and under to be able to have free breakfast or lunch during the summer. Gives them a nice play, or gives them an opportunity if it's not available to them, and then also a supervised environment. Kind of just going over the numbers, hit over 10,000 free meals this summer, and had an increase of 1,573 total over last year. And then it just gives a breakdown of each location and the meals. So you can see all the meals were increased except for the breakfast at high school. That could be for a variety of different reasons, activities, just people in town, vacations. But we did already talk and have it on our calendar for next year of different ways that we can communicate this out to the public that it's available, and it's free.
Is there a number of weeks that we offer this in the summer? Is it during summer school or what?
Yep. So it's and I put on there the serving days. Parkside, there were 24 serving days. I don't have the date range on there, Bill, but there were 24 serving days at Parkside and 22 at the high school.
One side of summer school, kind of.
I believe it mainly falls within that range. Yeah.
Then I just asked Tricia, with the Parkside increase, our summer school takes place at Parkside, so I'm guessing that's why we have such a high usage.
Yeah, I think that's been a great move since the summer schools moved to Parkside instead of the middle school. Yeah.
Well, I think the other part of it, Bill, is we're just seeing families that this is a real benefit for.
Well, it's a high need.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree.
Yep.
I agree.
But there's no income guidelines. Anyone can go.
Yep.
Yep.
Everybody's up to 18 years old.
It's good PR, too. Thanks for that report.
Thank you, Dion. The administrator's report, Mr. Munson.
In my report, I shared with you the new teacher workshop and workshop week. So we have, I don't know, Jeremy's not here, but 40 new teachers coming in tomorrow, I think, or close to it. So it'll be a busy week this week, and then with our all-staff day on Tuesday next week, and licensed staff will be in the buildings and district on a week from today, actually. I also shared information about the incentive revenue that we offered some classes this year in our Achievement and Integration Collaborative. We offered an Intro to Education course and a Principles of Biology. That was a 4-week course over the summer. So in Marshall, I think we had maybe 12 students, 13 students who took those courses over the summer, and this was our first attempt at this as a collaborative, but we had really positive feedback. So we actually had a meeting today, talked about what we might do and build on that in the future. Mary Kay's report included information relative to scheduling and what's going on with that, and also PBIS training for her staff that will be taking place on August 27th. It's been a while since the middle school has had PBIS training. They've had a PBIS program for a number of years, but with significant turnover in staff, she had a really good idea to let's bring some folks in and train all of our staff again or for the first time on PBIS, positive behavioral intervention support. So that'll be taking place. Brian reported for both the high school and Maytech. Class of 2019 ACT scores were positive, and hopefully some of that is because of the John Baylor, I think it's called On to College program now, or something like that, that was supported by the Pride in the Tiger Foundation. And if you read his report, there's some pretty amazing information, data in there. And then also he said that he shared that there were 116 students enrolled in summer school this past summer, so we have some that are still finishing up, I think, some work to get their credits for summer. Bruce Remy's report, he shared some information about a branding process through VIP branding, which is a part of the BSN Sports request for proposal that was approved a few months ago. And also he shared that by and large, fall sports are now 1 week into their season since they started last Monday. Jeremy shared some information about work that's taking place with peer coaches and in our professional learning communities. And also he shared just a little bit of information about the new teacher center that he and Beth Ritter are receiving training through, along with our principals, relative to the mentor induction work that Beth will be doing this year. So lots of good stuff going on. And Dion, if you want to go over your report.
I'll just hit a couple highlights. Lauren and I did some site visits last week with the building principals to go over some of the things that we made a list of some of the things we thought should be done prior to school starting or need to be done while school is going on. Just a huge thank you to all the custodians. They do such a great job shining up the buildings, and just very impressed with it. The time clock system that you guys approved at one of your meetings, we're going to be starting that up with the first day of school, so there's going to be a lot less paper time sheets. Tammy and I will be doing some training with some of the staff next week during workshop week. And then just another note, MRAA has their fall tour coming up, and I believe Scott and I are going to attend the one in Worthington on Wednesday the 26th, if anybody else is available or interested.
Of September.
Of September, yep. Welcome to ride along. It'll be exciting.
You driving?
Yeah.
I might drive separate.
Okay, moving on. Anybody have any questions for Dion or Scott? Okay, if not, the next item, first review of policies 301 to 306. Any questions on that? Not. Our first action item is approval of the notice of the election. I'll need a motion.
So moved.
Second, anyone?
Second.
Thank you, Will. Any discussion?
I believe this is just informational follow-up to the filing period that ended August 14th. So you can take a look at where the wards will be at in terms of polling places and just some of the details and whatnot that will take place. And I believe that each of the 4 candidates on every ballot they rotate them, if I'm not mistaken, alphabetically. So I think so. That's what they do in most places. Yeah.
Okay, I'll call for the vote. And that is approved. Our next item is approval of the school safety grant applications. Make a motion.
I'll second. Thank you for your work on that, Scott.
Any more discussion?
Well, I would just, in addition to the memorandum that I included here, which ended up being more information than I thought it was going to be, but I also wanted you to have a pretty clear picture of what we're doing. And you can see that on the bottom of the first page and the top of the second, we've kind of listed the high priority items and what we're focusing on in all of our grant applications. So we will, it's a nice segue, the Alice piece, another opportunity to talk about the importance of school safety and how we cannot take that for granted anymore. So we will be submitting 5 applications, 1 for all of our sites. You can see in the memo here what the high priority items are as defined by the Department of Education. We've really focused on secure outer perimeter at each of our buildings, keeping unwanted visitors out of the building, which aligned really well with the high priority projects that were defined by the Minnesota Department of Education. It was also nice, if you want to call it that, for us when we did receive information and details from the MDE that a lot of the work that we did starting all the way back in 2011 and 2012 fit in pretty well with these high priority projects. So it's kind of good to see that consistent vision for our district in terms of school safety and security. On the second page, you can see the specific amounts right now that the grant applications are. We still have some things that we're working out. We need to hear back on. We've really narrowed that list down, and Dion has done a lot of work on this as well. So, but when you look at those amounts, $426,470 at Parkside, $180,190 at Westside, $490,670 at the middle school, and that includes 3 doors. The front one, the district office door, and the early childhood door. It's all one site, though, so we have to submit those together. Maytech, cost of $99,370. That would be for the Maytech door and the Child Care Center door as well. And then Marshall High School, $286,970. I broke down the high priority areas, access controls all the way through visual notification systems. You can see that the cumulative total right now of our grants, and please realize that there's going to be some small adjustments to those before we actually hit the submit button on August 29th. But right now we're looking at grants that we're going to submit for $1,483,670. So there's work that needs to be done. We've recognized that for a number of years. This is a good opportunity, hopefully, to get one or more of these applications approved, and then we'll just go from there relative to our short and long-term plans facilities-wise. So, Dion, I don't know if you have anything to add or anything that I've left out.
I have a question with regard to this as being an initiative that the legislature is supporting. $25 million in outstate, or is it 12.5? Split between outstate and metro?
It's $25 million total, split between outstate and metro. It's not going to go very far, Bill.
Will we have an opportunity to levy for safety for this kind of thing? Discussion legislatively, because they know this is not enough money to get what needs to be done. Is there any dialogue?
I've already heard that through some of our professional organizations that school safety will likely be a major discussion or topic during the legislative session. So as you look at your advocacy efforts, we know this is important. They know this is important. Unfortunately, we only ended up with access to ourselves potentially $12.5 million to address it.
And some of the dialogue that's taken place, Scott, with your association and your association, Dion, are they talking about asking the legislature to allow us to levy locally?
That has been discussed, but some of that will depend on what happens in November with the elections.
I know.
I mean, you know, last year they had it in their package of being able to use safety money for long-term facility maintenance, and of course nothing got passed, so that went to the wayside too. But that would help.
I think there's 3 ways to approach it, I think, Bill. 1, levy, increase whatever levy. 2 is what Dion was talking about. Take existing levy or aid dollars, such as the Safe Schools levy or long-term facilities maintenance, and open up what we can use those for, probably. And third is just allocating dollars either on the formula or through a grant process or something like this. So I think those will be what we'll hear the most of. And I would guess it'll start with more flexibility.
And that'd be like robbing Peter to pay Paul, because we've got to fix roofs and boilers and that kind of stuff.
Yep, exactly.
It'd be nice if it opened up how we can use the money instead of
Flexibility-wise.
it's pretty limited right now.
Because we prioritize all the time. And honestly, sometimes it's like fix roofs or fix a parking lot or put new windows in. I mean, none of those are easy choices, so.
What needs a Band-Aid today?
Exactly.
Are they gonna hand these out by building or by project, where they break it down to individual projects, or?
By building.
So we could get approved for Parkside and not the other 4.
Correct. We could
Parts
get,
That's where
pieces
we
of-
would have to use it, whatever they.
yep, if we, like you said, we could get approved for all 5, one of the 5, the smallest of the 5,
But they don't break it down to the.
Nope, I just broke that down for you so you could sort of see where the dollars are being allocated to right now.
Can they break it down to the point where they can approve part of one project, one building, or do they have to approve the whole thing?
According to what we've been told, they're going to approve the whole application for that site. I would guess if they got to where they had allocated $12,470,000 and the next random numbered grant application came up and it was $50,000, they would probably let that school use the remaining $30,000. But it's going to be interesting. There were 500 participants in the webinar that the Department of Education had, and they anticipate possibly over 400 grants submitted.
And who's going to do the reading?
Not me.
And what's the timeline for decision?
Do you remember that, Deanne? I think it was October or November.
Should I have that right here?
September 28th.
We're 85, 90% ready to go with our applications. We worked on the narrative the other day, and we just have to do some tweaking. But this is important, and I think that having your approval, and I know there's a motion in a second, but having your approval just really shows what we all know, that we support school safety and we're moving forward the best we can.
Thank you.
Our next item is similar to what we just did, a statement of assurances. I'll make a motion.
Second.
And this just a requirement that we need to submit with each of the grant applications. Just it lays out essentially what the expectations will be if we receive one of the grants. So it's also good information for you to have an idea as a school board what we're dealing with as well.
Okay, I'll call for the vote. And that is approved. Our next item is authorization to enter into agreement between Marshall Public Schools and SDSU Teacher Education Hub. We need a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion?
We're seeing more and more memorandums of understanding, memorandums of agreements. Everybody, seems like organizations, understandably so, want to put things in writing just to clarify what everybody's responsibilities are. So as we get these, we'll just roll them forward to you. Anytime we can get student teachers or practicum teachers in our school district, work with our awesome staff, I think that's a benefit for us.
Absolutely, it is. I agree.
I'll call for the vote. It's approved.
It also helps with potential candidates. Big time.
Anything else? Anybody? If not, I will adjourn the meeting.
Good job, man.